5 years ago, on a cold evening in a small American city, a young man sat alone in a tiny apartment. The room was quiet except for the faint buzz of an old refrigerator in the corner. His table was empty, his wallet was almost empty, and his bank account, well, it barely existed. When he opened that worn-out wallet, he counted what he had left. $11. That was everything. No savings, no safety net. No rich family waiting to rescue him. Just $11 and a life that felt stuck. For many people, a moment like this would feel like the end of the road. But for him, it quietly became the beginning of something no one around him could imagine. Because 5 years later, that same man would be living a life worth over $10 million. But the path between $11 and $10 million wasn't a straight line. It was messy, uncertain, and filled with moments where quitting would have been the easier choice. And this is the story of how it happened. Back then, his life looked ordinary, maybe even a little hopeless. He worked a low-paying job that barely covered rent. Every morning he woke up early, dragged himself through traffic, and spent long hours doing work that didn't inspire him. At the end of each month, the numbers never seemed to work. Rent took most of his paycheck. Bills took the rest. And what remained was almost nothing. Some nights he skipped meals to save money. Some weekends he stayed inside because going out cost too much. He watched other people on social media living the kind of lives he could barely imagine. Traveling, starting businesses, buying homes, driving nice cars. Meanwhile, he felt like he was stuck in the same place. But there was one thing about him that made his situation different. He refused to believe that this was the final version of his life. Late at night, when most people were sleeping, he would sit by the window of that small apartment and look at the lights of the city. And he would think about what his life could become. Not what it was, what it could be. One night, after another long shift, he came home exhausted. He tossed his wallet on the table and sat down. That's when he saw it again. $11. It sounds small, almost meaningless. But in that moment, those $11 forced him to ask a question that changed everything. What if I stopped waiting and started building something? He didn't have capital. He didn't have connections. He didn't have a fancy degree. But he had something else. Time and curiosity. So instead of spending his nights watching TV or scrolling endlessly through social media, he started doing something different. He started learning. At first, it was simple. He watched videos about business. He read articles about entrepreneurs. He listened to podcasts from people who had started with nothing and built something big. The more he learned, the more he realized something surprising. Most successful people didn't start rich. Many of them started broke, confused, uncertain, just like him. The difference was that they took action when others stayed stuck. So he kept studying. Some nights he read books about marketing. Other nights he learned about online businesses. Sometimes he just wrote ideas in a cheap notebook, idea after idea. Most of them were terrible. But every now and then, one idea felt interesting, and eventually one idea felt possible. It wasn't glamorous. It wasn't a huge startup idea. It was just a small online hustle, something he could start with almost nothing. And that's where the $11 came in. Those $11 became the first tiny investment in his future. He used them to buy a simple tool he needed to start. No fancy office, no team, no investors. Just a laptop, an internet connection, and a lot of late nights. After work each day, he would come home, eat something simple, and sit down at his laptop. Midnight often came and went before he even noticed. Sometimes he stayed up until 2 in the morning, then woke up a few hours later to go back to his job. The routine was exhausting, but something had changed. For the first time, he felt like he was building something that belonged to him. The first few months were brutal. Nothing worked. His first attempt failed. Then his second idea failed too. Sometimes he would spend weeks working on something, only to see zero results. No customers, no money, no proof that he was moving forward. There were nights when doubt felt louder than motivation. He wondered if he was wasting his time. He wondered if everyone else had been right when they told him success was unrealistic. But every time he thought about quitting, he remembered that tiny apartment, the empty wallet, the $11, and the quiet promise he had made to himself. He would not stay stuck. So instead of quitting, he adjusted. He studied what went wrong. He improved his ideas. He kept trying. Then one day, something unexpected happened. He woke up, checked his phone, and saw a notification. Someone had bought his product. It wasn't a huge amount, but it was real. A real customer. Real money. At first, he thought it was a mistake. But a few hours later, another sale appeared. Then another, and another. The numbers were still small, but they were proof. Proof that the system could work. proof that his efforts weren't pointless. And that tiny spark of success lit a fire inside him. He doubled down. Instead of slowing down, he worked even harder. Every day he improved something: better marketing, better products, better systems. Little by little, the results started to grow. The first week he made $100, then 1,000. Months later, he crossed 10,000. The numbers didn't just change his bank account, they changed his mindset. For the first time, he could see a different future. A future where money wasn't a constant stress. A future where he controlled his time. A future where the life he imagined while looking at those city lights could actually become real. Years passed. His small hustle grew into a real business. Then that business grew into multiple projects. He learned how to scale. He built systems. He surrounded himself with smarter people who helped him grow faster. Eventually, the income that once seemed impossible became normal. 6 figures turned into 7. Opportunities multiplied. And the life he once watched from the outside slowly became his reality. Today, 5 years after that moment with $11, his life looks completely different. He wakes up in a beautiful home. He drives cars he once saw only in magazines. He travels when he wants, and most importantly, he owns his time. But if you ask him what truly changed his life, he won't talk about money. He'll talk about a decision, a quiet decision made in a small apartment late at night, the decision to stop accepting the life he had and start building the life he wanted. Because success rarely begins with millions. It begins with something much smaller. Sometimes it begins with a single idea. Sometimes it begins with one late night of learning. And sometimes it begins with just $11. The truth is, the gap between where you are and where you want to be often looks enormous. It can feel impossible, but every big transformation begins with a tiny step, one decision, one attempt, one moment where you choose growth over comfort. Most people never take that step. They wait, they hesitate, they assume they need more money, more time, or more perfect conditions before they begin. But the people who eventually succeed understand something powerful. You don't start with everything. You start with what you have. And if you keep going, if you keep learning, if you keep improving, the path slowly unfolds. 5 years ago, he had $11. Today, he has a life worth millions. Not because he was lucky, not because someone handed him an opportunity, but because he refused to let his starting point define his ending. And the next question is simple. What will you do with your starting point? Because somewhere right now, someone else is sitting in a small room with almost nothing. And 5 years from now, their story might look exactly like this one.